All right, here's a question we get asked pretty regularly, and actually, I was on a call with a team who asked this very question, and I had an interesting response that we'll get into, and it will be, I guess that will be this response. But they said, like, how do we design this tier one, tier two, tier three relationship in math and supporting students at the tier three level of intervention? And how do we do that so that's like we do it by research backed principles, but also practically for students? Like how do we help students who need extra support without removing them from the classroom? And like how do we do that type of structure? And like tell us, that's what they said. Tell us what to do here. Like, what should this look like? And I basically said, and here, you guys aren't going to like this, but I basically said that's not your problem. There are some other issues that I think were going on, and we'll unpack that as one of the solutions. But I mean, let's get into this. How do we design tier three intervention without missing tier one instruction, or do we? Like, let's talk about multi-tiered systems of support for math.
I'm going to predict already, John, that what you suspect their problem is teacher content knowledge. And like teacher content knowledge beyond just, like
Mm,
mathematical knowledge for teaching that. Imagine
maybe.
I had a system in place where all educators teaching math were well positioned to do so. They had deep mathematical proficiency. They understood math development, and they understood student learning profiles. And so in that scenario where all of our teachers who are responsible for teaching math are well positioned to do so, do you think we would have this problem?
Definitely,
Good
I think
question.
definitely not as extreme, right? Like, because I think we're still,
Yeah.
no matter how amazing and well oiled this machine becomes, right? That we call math education. If we do it really, really well, we're still going to have variances in the students that are coming from different experiences. There's going to be some students that miss time for this reason or that reason. We're going to have those things, and a well-oiled math education machine is going to have the ability for us to put them and support them in ways that essentially tier one, tier two, and tier three instruction is really trying to set you up for. I think the challenge we have is that we have, as you had mentioned, there's so much confusion out there around how should I be teaching tier one instruction, that when we get all the way to tier three instruction, think of the disconnect that we have in terms of like, what am I doing when I'm working with students who are behind? And what am I doing in the classroom? These are two different individuals. And as you mentioned, Yvette, if one or maybe neither of those educators are well positioned to deliver high quality math instruction, then that's obviously going to make it even more challenging and even more, I'm going to turn to Beth here, and I want to get, your thoughts on what you've been seeing in classrooms. I know you have quite a bit of experience in the US and the places that you've been working and supporting. Like, talk to us a little bit about this like disconnect between what's going on in the tier one classroom, what's going on in the tier three classroom, and like how do we essentially do this better?
Right. So I think a lot of what I see is tier three instruction functioning in isolation. So it's not in any way connected to the tier one instruction. So, as a student might be identified, as 3 or 4 grade levels behind. And so that tier three instructor then is working on things like basic addition and subtraction, whereas in their tier one classroom, they're multiplying fractions. So when those two things happen in isolation like that, the student who's expected to participate in tier one in that classroom is just feeling completely lost. It's a foreign language. There's the Charlie Brown teacher, right? Womp, womp, womp.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not understanding anything the teacher is saying because I don't have
Right.
those foundations in place. And so a lot of what I see is those two tiers functioning in isolation. And so, as a coach or an administrator, someone who supports the tier one and the tier three instructors, I think it's crucial that we get them together as often as we can, doing math, kind of like Kyle, like you were saying, they need to be experiencing the mathematics, but also talking about what it looks like. A tier three instructor should be sharing
Co-teaching.
with should be sharing with the tier one instructor. Here's how this student can access grade level content. And it might be, building a model, drawing a picture. And that would be success for the student if they could build a model to multiply two fractions. And likewise, the tier one instructor needs to say, well, here's what we're doing in class. And here are some of the tools and things that I'm teaching students to use. And that tier three instructor needs to be supporting that and working with that, not teaching them something totally different or a different way of approaching the math that's going on in the classroom. So to answer your question, Kyle, typically what I see is those two levels of instruction being taught in isolation.
Right. Yeah. And you're absolutely right to recommend that, Beth, because like when you are teaching in isolation, this was what perpetuates might as well just pull them from that class and have them do this other program over here anyway. And all of a sudden now you're going against some of what the research is saying about what you should be doing for tier three. So it's like, that's an important.
Let me just interrupt quickly because something you said there. I think a lot of tier one instructors would welcome.
Right. They're like, get them out.
Get the kids out of this classroom because, and not to, to make it sound like they don't enjoy the students, but, it's a struggle to have a wide range of abilities in your math classroom. And so when the idea comes up that, well, maybe they just shouldn't be participating in tier one, that tier one teacher's probably like, yeah, get them out. Right, my lesson will go so much more smoothly if I don't have to consider these.
And if there's no coordination between the two, what you'll also see is that student just patiently waiting until the lesson's over and then go, can I go to the class? Can I go to my support class now? Right? Like, and they just didn't even participate or think about the lesson that just occurred because there's no coordination or no joint effort between what's happening in these two different educators' choices.
Right. And it's thinking about it, like you really have a lot of times it's like two separate math programs happening, right? Like we have this one at a level where the student is not nearly ready for. And then we have another program. You had used the example of like, we're multiplying fractions here and over here, we're doing addition and subtraction. There's a complete disconnect, even though addition and subtraction is an important skill for that student to have, and maybe they do need support in that area, but it's nothing that they can bring to the tier one classroom tomorrow and actually feel like they've gotten a little closer to where they need to be, right? And I think that's a really, really difficult piece here. So I love that idea of making sure that those educators are connected, that they are talking, that they do have some sort of connection there so that that student can feel more supported and hopefully start to make some connections to what they're doing in the tier three situation with what's going on in that tier one situation.
Yeah. And if you reverse engineer that for a sec, right? And you think about in a perfect world, coordination is important right there. However, the coordination has to be there, but also the vision for what both educators perceive to be as important instructional moves also have to be in alignment. Otherwise, you also get the silo effect happening, the disconnect happening here, because I'm going to be, reinforcing this type of lesson or these types of moves. Maybe we got a teacher who's like, I'm going to be showing these strategies over here, but I'm still doing multiplication and I'm still doing multiplication of fractions, but over in this side over here, we're not doing any of that. And then all of a sudden there's a disconnect there because we don't share the same common core value of like, what is it we're trying to do here? And we don't have this like vision of like this understanding of like what math experience should be here in our building. And so to give you the insight, that's the piece that I said that this team needed to have. Like you said, like you could come up with a million plans to coordinate the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 plan at your school. But unless you have a vision and what it is, like you've defined this clarity of like this coherence of like what math instruction should look like, it doesn't matter what's going to happen. It's not going to like be impactful because you're always going to have this competing things. Even if you get the teachers together, it's you're a little bit better, but you have teachers driving at different things when they're acting in silos anyway. So I said, that's your first problem you need to work on. Like you work on that through the multi-tiered systems of support channel, and then that can create coherence across your building, which is really your issue.
So I think ideally what we're saying is that if you have two different teachers teaching tier 1 and tier 3, so let's say you have a homeroom teacher or a math teacher and an interventionist, that they are working collaboratively to ultimately say, well, this is the grade level big idea or learning objective that we're striving toward. Okay, this is where this student is entering. How do we get them closer? So if we're multiplying fractions by the end of grade 8 and we're looking at this student who may be entering around a third grade entry point, it's like, well, where are they now? What do they bring to the table? How do we get them closer to the end of grade level expectation? And to Beth's point, how are we defining success? And that those two educators are using the same models, the same language, the same structures to support that student when they're in intervention and in the tier 1 classroom. And we're all on the same page. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the challenges that I hear all the time of why the ideal is hard.
Mm-hmm.
The intervention teacher pulls from multiple classes.
Mm-hmm.
And so this class is doing multiplying fractions, but this class is working on geometry, and this class is doing this. And so this is where I used to be super anti-pacing guides. Like I felt like they really handcuffed educators into, but this is where, if you're going to be implementing an MTSS model with tiered intervention, it's not possible for that interventionist to just pull that one student. They don't have the time in their schedule. They're going to have to work with a group of students at the same time to provide that small group, and they may be from different classes. So now you're not talking about just coordination between the teacher and the interventionist. You're talking about the grade level team and the interventionist.
So this is really interesting because, in a few episodes ago, we were chatting about some of the challenges of not being able to finish, covering all the content, which some people might be saying, well, wait a second. On one hand, we want, flexibility in how we deliver the curriculum. And then on the other hand, if we want to have like a successful model where, we're doing tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 instruction effectively, we need everyone to kind of be on the same page. This is where I might argue that, doing a pacing guide, but doing it in a way that is innate, or that actually brings spiraling or interleaving into the mix right from the get-go, can be a great place to meet in the middle. So we don't want people veering too far off, but at the same time, we also don't want everyone rolling through just, chapter 1, chapter 2, all the way through the year, because we're going to run into some problems there as well. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that, as we start looking at, planning our pacing guides, thinking about more than just one problem here. We don't just want everyone on the same page, but we also want to make sure we're considering some of these other factors as well that we've discussed in the past, which is, again, making sure that we touch on all of the content, but then we pick and choose which content do we want to go to a much deeper depth and spend a more significant amount of time on over or throughout the school year.
Yeah, and realistically, depending on the size of the school, Kyle, what that might look like is, if we're asking teachers to maybe now reconsider that common pacing guide, maybe it's more of a conceptual pacing guide. Maybe it's like a big idea. Maybe 3rd grade or 8th grade can agree that over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to be kind of focusing on this big idea. And that, one classroom might be at a different lesson than another classroom, but that's okay, because that tier 3 instructor then knows that here's the big idea, and here's where I'm going to help the student build those possible missing foundational skills, or those that unfinished learning that might be existing there.
Right. Now, as we turn to talking to our coaches and our leaders, our principals, people who can make some decisions around structure, like this is going to be tough. This is a tough topic to kind of solve for, and really what you're trying to do is trying to build capacity of your educators to make appropriate decisions, as long as we have the clarity of where we're all trying to go. So like the moves you can be making are, do we have a common vision for math instruction? Is it clear that we could be, moving towards this versus this? Like, this is what it looks like in the classroom. This is what it looks like when we have support for those moves. What are we valuing in terms of our essential standards and essentials in our classrooms? Like, do we have a clear objective of like, this is the important components of our classroom experience, so that we can be coordinated across the support that's happening? How do I make that happen? How do I coordinate support for educators across this? If I'm saying that coordination between tier 1 and tier 3 educators is important, especially when I have coaches involved, how do I make sure that we're creating that coordination? Like, am I dedicating a protecting time for PLCs where we're focusing on a lesson development that spans the multi-tiered system? You can be doing that. Like, you can be making sure that you repurpose the PLC time. Maybe the PLC time is hasn't been used in that way in the past, and it's really just been a glorified, hey, this is our our work time. But maybe we can get our grade level teams together to make that a priority. What we know for sure is that when you protect time and you say these are the important components, and then you act on those important components, then shifts start to happen. But you have to say, this is the important part of what we're trying to do. MTSS coordination across our system is important for us. Here's how we're protecting it, and here's how we're supporting it. You have to say that at every staff meeting, at every PLC. You have to be making that the major focus of the work that you want to do.
At the district level also, John, I feel like oftentimes what I see is that when there are PLCs or professional learning days or hours or whatever might be in place, oftentimes as the mandate from the district is that all of my interventionists are going to go and do something else.
Right.
They have to do this other thing. And so they're not even allowed or invited into that tier 1 world. And so, keeping that in mind too, and, what are the commitments that we're putting on our interventionists, and can we maybe minimize some of those during those times to allow for that collaboration?
One thing I'm remiss to not share is that I want to really make it clear how hard this work is, though, for the educator.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes it's like we're just at the leadership level saying, now go and do. And I don't know that we can even clearly articulate the depth of knowledge that is required to do what we are describing. To be able to take a student who's entering around 2nd, 3rd grade and on-ramp them to multiplying fractions in grade 8. Like, I really don't want anyone to think that we're oversimplifying this or that we are ignoring the mathematical content knowledge required by both the tier 1 and tier 3 teacher to do this work effectively.
100%.
And so if we cannot invest in deeply building the capacity of the educators responsible for teaching math at any tier, like if we can't put 40 into their professional development and we can't create opportunities for networking and PLCs, because this work is incredibly challenging, and thinking particularly for elementary educators who are not content specialists and who may themselves not, like when you think about the math knowledge required for teaching, and I love Deborah Ball's graphic, they talk about just general math knowledge, your own ability to solve the problem. Sometimes elementary teachers are put into a grade level that they aren't even well positioned to solve the problem themselves.
100%.
Like they're teaching grade 6 with a grade 6 math level themselves. And so I think that if we aren't well positioned as a system to really invest in building educator mathematical proficiency and understanding of math development from, K-10, to be able to do this work and provide this responsive instruction in a coordinated way, then our ongoing recommendation is to have specialized math teachers who, even if I'm working at a 6th grade level currently myself, but all I do is teach math, and I can focus all of my energy, all of my
100%.
podcast listening, my PD minutes, my networks that I'm a part of, the organizations and conferences that I attend is going to be completely dedicated to building my mathematical proficiency, because I'm not being pulled to also support literacy and social studies and science and music and phys ed. You're going to have a far stronger system.
Right.
100%.
Yeah, well summarized. I think that's a great way to kind of leave off this episode. And I guess I'll rewind here to the beginning, because I said, this conversation came from a very common question that we get asked regularly, and specifically we were just asked this. And what I said in the end to this group was that it wasn't it wasn't just the structure that you needed to worry about. It was about these 4 big pieces that make up your math improvement flywheel that you really need to focus on and build on and try to work towards. And, vision and goal setting and coordination and coherence around what math instruction needs to look like has to be spread across your system. Are you working towards solving that problem? Because it is a problem if you're trying to solve problems like this one. So we said that they needed to work on that, and we give them some suggestions. We needed to coordinate the efforts. The PLCs, the pull-out PD sessions, the coaching wasn't coordinated. And typically we see that it's not coordinated to strive towards achieving this vision. And so that's a big problem that we all need to be working on. And we need to be making gains to saying, like, are they coordinated across the system to work on this vision that we're trying to solve? And are we clear on how to make those moves? Are we helping our administrators make those moves in their own schools? You've just hit the nail on the head, Yvette, is that we can't do any of those things, or we could do all those things, but it's not really going to move the needle until the third component of that flywheel is moving, which is like, are we spending time developing support and opportunities for teachers to build their own proficiencies for math and build their own competencies toward the mathematics that they're teaching, grade level above, grade level below. Without that, none of this the flywheel halts. And so that's a problem that we need to be working on. It has to be part of your math improvement solution. And then the fourth component is always embedded in all of these things, which is really thinking about, how am I creating this to be ongoing? How am I solving this constant fragility problem of math resting on 1-2 people's shoulders? Like, how do we pass the knowledge around so that we're working together? And so I said to them, yeah, you could work on your math, multi-tiered support system structure, but really you need to be working on these 4 things so that you give that thing the hope. You give that thing the foundation that can actually make it work. And that's the recommendations that we made to this team. This is the recommendation we make to most teams that we're on calls with, is that we do need to build our math improvement flywheels so that any decisions that we make in our math improvement work has a hope of being successful. If you want to see that math improvement flywheel looks like and what are the pieces involved, you can head on over to makemathmoments.com/grow. There's a quick assessment there you can fill out, and then we will send you a report on some of the areas that you can be striving towards. So that was makemathmoments.com/grow.